Welcome to Vermont's Voice, your source for the public interest conversation in the State House and beyond. I'm your host, Jordan Heiden. Today, I'm sitting down with Zach Tomanelli, who is VPIRG's Communications and Engagement Director and Consumer Protection Advocate. We'll be tackling some big issues today, like consumer protection, data privacy, big tech, and whether AI will be soon running the world. Let's hope not. This is Vermont's Voice.
Well, hey, Jordan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. We're in different places than we usually are.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. You know how you have a favorite side of the bed?
Uh-huh.
I feel like I have a favorite side of the podcast desk.
Yeah.
And it's the side
I'm
you're
right
at.
in the middle of it. Well, it's only temporary.
Yeah.
We've also got some new set dressing.
Oh my God,
that we definitely should talk
We
about.
have
Big
to
change for the viewers at home.
It's actually seismic. We need to talk about
Yes.
change. It's
Who's
the plant.
this?
It's the plant. Isn't she cute?
She's very cute.
Okay, so the problem with the plant we had before is that it took up, not just this little desk area. It was literally like touching people, like climbing over shoulders, really desperate to be a part of the show. I shouldn't say it, but it was not cute. It was not a very cute plant, in my opinion. I love all plants. That one wasn't it.
I will say, I liked the plant. It definitely was stealing the spotlight from Jane in last week's episode, which you should all go watch if you haven't.
Yeah.
All about town meeting day.
It's really good.
But the pot that it was in was not the prettiest.
And look how nice this pot is.
This is gorgeous.
It's like this blue glaze that kind of goes with our logo a little bit.
Yeah, and it matches our new books because we're well-read individuals.
Yeah,
and
it's toxic sludge is good for you. So
lies, damn lies, and the public relations industry.
yeah,
Very relevant.
We're making big changes here, as you can see on the podcast.
Huge changes. But we're not here to talk about plants.
We could.
We could. But we're actually going to talk about kind of the opposite of plants,
Okay.
artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
Today's episode, all about AI. So I wanted to start with a question for you, Jordan. How much have you heard about deepfakes?
Very limited. I've heard the concept of deep fakes. It's just people looking like a person that they're not, or a thing being a thing that's not that thing.
That's pretty close. I've got a little cheat sheet here. Sorry. But deepfakes are AI-generated representations of real people's images, their voices, and other defining characteristics of them.
Okay.
So the way they work is you can take a video or audio recording of someone, run it through this specialized AI model, and you end up with this output where you can make somebody do or say anything you want. Now, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that the political implications of that are a little scary.
Yeah, I don't like it at all, to be honest with you. Political or not.
Like, there's like funny videos online of like people making like Keanu Reeves do crazy things in convenience stores.
Do we need that, though?
It's fun. Do we need that in our politics, especially with everything going on in the country? I would say probably not.
No.
Well, the good news is, like we alluded to in last week's episode, is there's a lot of buzz about this issue. Mm-hmm. And in fact, at VPIRG, we're tracking a tripartisan bill right now, S23, that would address the deepfake issue. The bill would require the disclosure of misleading synthetic media, so AI-generated media, in the run-up to an election. So basically, if you knowingly publish false content made with AI and you don't tell people that it was made with AI, you can get in a lot of trouble.
Oh, okay.
And this was a real issue recently. I don't know if you remember during the primaries when thousands of New Hampshire voters, one state over from us, all got phone calls from somebody that sounded a hell of a lot like Joe Biden, telling them to stay home, don't go to the polls, don't vote. So this is not just like some made-up thing or hypothetical. Like, we've seen in the last year an explosion of AI content specifically targeting our elections.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm hoping that this bill passes then.
We hope so
Hearing
too.
of it.
We hope so too. It's right now in the Senate Committee on Government Operations.
Okay.
And last month it was actually reported that as part of testimony on the issue, those senators in that committee took a quiz to see if they could spot AI generated content. And that brings me to the reason that I'm sitting here, you're sitting there. We're going to play a little game.
Oh no, where I have to spot the AI content.
Exactly. But they looked at 5 sets of pictures, and can you guess how many they got right?
No.
Just give me a guess, any guess.
How many they got right?
Yeah.
Out of
5.
Out of 5. 1?
Yeah. 1.
Wow.
So that's the number to beat.
I have to get 1.
You got to get 1.
No
it's a little
pressure.
scary.
Yeah.
Now, to our listeners at home, this is going to be a visual game. If you're listening audio only, we're going to do our best to describe what's on these photos, but really what you should be doing is going to YouTube or Spotify to stream the video version of Vermont's Voice, because we put a lot of work into the production and we do some really fun things. So definitely go watch.
And maybe we can share the photos on social or something, someplace.
Oh, we'll definitely have, this will end up on our social media at
Okay.
some point for sure.
So there will be ways where people can see this.
There'll be ways.
Okay.
All right. So, Jordan, this is a game that I'm calling Generative AI or Genuinely Great Pie.
What? Oh my god.
So,
Great pie.
hope you can all
Wait,
see
they're all
this.
desserts?
I'm going to be showing you 4 sets of photos of pie and pie adjacent things.
Oh my
And your job is to point out which one of the photos is fake, which one is real. Are you ready?
I don't think I'm going to do a good job.
I think you're going to do great.
I just need 1.
You just need 1.
Okay.
All right, Jordan. So, first photo, we're going to start. Let me just show everybody. Make sure you can see that. Camera focus up. We've got some pie pictures.
Okay.
Which do you think?
They both look like pie.
That's the beauty of generative AI.
Okay.
It's really good.
I'm going to say this one because it looks almost too detailed.
This one's the fake one?
Yes.
That is correct. All right. So already you are tied with Senate Gov Ops.
That was truly just a guess. They both look real.
You do have a 50%, 50% chance of getting this right. Oh, let me not spoil the next one. All right. We're going off in a little bit of a different direction
this is
now.
not pie. Well,
Pizza
is it
pie.
I guess it is.
Pizza pie. Jordan,
Which one is?
is it generative AI or generally great pie?
They both look bad to me. I wouldn't eat either of these.
Yeah.
I'm not a pizza fan. Okay. Is this one fake on the right?
Yeah, wow. 2 for 2. I'll be honest, I didn't expect you to do this well.
I neither.
Okay, well, we're on a roll. All right.
Those both look fake to me.
All right, we're back.
All right, we have hands now.
Yeah, we have hands now.
Oh.
So we're back to pie, but as some of you may know, AI is notoriously bad at doing hands. It gives you like extra fingers. So I thought I would put some hands in, see if we can either trip you up or make it easier. Let's see how you do.
Okay. I'm only looking at the hands, to be honest. I think this one's fake.
What?
I got it.
You're killing me. I thought this was going to be so
Because-
much harder.
Because I see some like nails here, some like fingertips, and I don't see fingertips over here. It kind of gets cut off.
That's a really good point. Let me see if we can see this on the camera. Focus up, maybe. We'll put that in post. Editor, throw it in post. All right. Last question. So
I got a sneak peek.
You
of
got a
that,
sneak
and
peek.
it's weird.
Cream pies to the face. Which one is real? Which one is fake?
Oh, this one's hard. Which one's real? Which one's fake? This is just a guess because I'm really not sure.
I'm going to be so mad if you get this right.
This one's fake. I got it.
You got it.
Yes. I
Four
should hit the casino.
You should hit the casino.
Feeling lucky.
Or you should run for Senate, is the lesson that we're learning here.
Both?
Maybe both. I don't think gambling's legal in Vermont.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
Or maybe we have sports betting. I don't remember.
I don't know. So I will announce my run for election now.
You heard it here first, folks.
That was fun, though, and genuinely hard.
Yeah,
I had some good guesses.
Thanks for playing. So today's episode's all about AI. This didn't do the best job of illustrating how difficult it is to tell AI content from real content, but maybe folks at home, you can play along, see if you do as well as Jordan. But that's all I have for you today. Next up, you're going to talk to my boss, Zach Tomanelli, who is so good at explaining these kinds of issues. So I'm really excited to hear how that conversation goes. Hope you'll stick around.
I'm sitting down with Zach Tomanelli, VPIRG's Communication and Engagement Director and Consumer Protection Advocate. That's because, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're talking about a lot of big topics today. Those include consumer protection, data privacy, even artificial intelligence. So Zach, thank you so much for being here and lending your expertise on the topic.
Thank you for having me. Expertise feels such a strong word, but it's I'll call it more than an interest, maybe less than expertise.
Okay, well, it feels like of everyone we work with, you would be the expert.
It's a sliding scale.
It's a sliding scale.
I gotcha. Yeah.
I know next to nothing about many of the things we're talking about today. So I'm personally very invested.
Very good.
And very thrilled to have you here.
Excited to be here.
Great. So before we get into the actual conversation itself, I'm wondering if you think there's anything our listeners should know about you, about your work, and maybe not. No pressure.
No, I mean, I guess happy I didn't think about the whole biography thing. But yeah, I mean, I've been with VPIRG for I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary at VPIRG a month ago. So
congrats.
A whole decade. I guess I would say it's flown by. In some ways it has. And in other ways, it's been, kind of a long, interesting 10 years. But yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Hudson Valley in New York. I went to school at Ithaca College in Central New York, spent some time down in New York City, but then my then girlfriend, now wife, she was born and raised in Vermont. One was looking to come back here. That was 10 years ago. VPIRG was hiring, the job title at that time was online coordinator. I had some experience fiddling around with things online. We'll talk about that here. And, it worked out. So I've been here for 10 years, and in that time, as you mentioned, communications and engagement director, but I've also picked up work as our consumer protection advocate, which covers a whole, range of topics and range of things. And that's been really interesting and exciting work.
Awesome. Well, glad to hear it and excited to get into it. So let's do that.
Yeah.
All right. So starting with consumer protection, obviously that is a huge pillar of VPIRG's work. But I think the term itself sometimes lacks clarity or definition. It feels like a big, broad term.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could tell me what or who we are protecting Vermont consumers from exactly.
Yeah, that's a good question. And when we say we, I mean, consumer protection it covers a lot of things. When, we say we, in this case, VPIRG, the way we look at it, well, first off, I mean, we're all consumers. We all participate in the economy, in the marketplace. We buy things, access services, so on and so forth. And when we say who are we protecting them from, well, threats in general. And that could be, usually, financial threats, but also could be, potential physical harm. And you might be saying like, well, where does that come from when we talk about consumers, the marketplace? Well, I guess I would say primarily comes from two places. One, usually from situations where there's a real sort of power imbalance. Large corporations, often things that maybe exist in either a monopoly or a near kind of monopoly where consumers don't have a lot of choice. They need to kind of make use of these services, and that puts them at a position where they can be maybe taken advantage of, paying exorbitant fees, maybe not being able to access the services that they want to access. And then there are, actual malicious actors, people who kind of perpetrate scams on consumers. And we want to protect people from that. And, that's not like in obviously like the law enforcement sense. What we try to do is, look for policies that make it so that it makes it harder for scammers to kind of take advantage of people. And we'll talk a little bit about that, I guess, when we get into the data privacy and how those two things are related. So, we're trying to kind of, keep people safe, keep people protected as they try to just navigate their day-to-day lives, buying things online, going on trips, accessing healthcare, basic things that people need.
Just living life.
Just living life. Yeah. the other thing I'll say, I mentioned kind of like we think a lot of like sometimes big corporations taking advantage, but also like there are situations where just the situation itself can lend itself to predatory circumstances. And a good example of that, I guess, would be, VPIRG did work a few years ago it's actually now almost probably 10 years ago, on kind of reining in the rent-to-own industry. Like this is a really good kind of example. Rent to own, these, are things like, rent-a-centers where people who maybe can't, afford a washing machine or a television, to buy outright, they can rent to and eventually own, these things. But there's a situation where there's a power imbalance because the type of people who, need to access this are usually lower income. Obviously, they can't buy something outright, and they're relying on this. And the situation that we saw there was that these, rent-to-own companies could charge, really kind of exorbitant prices over time. And somebody who could not maybe afford a $600 or $700 washing machine up front might end up paying, $50 or $100 a month because that's what they can maybe afford piecemeal. But over time, that $700 washing machine ends up costing that person $4,000 or $5,000, something like that. Okay. So Vermont and a lot of other states now have done this, have put in laws saying like, obviously the business model is what it is, like you're paying over time and there is going to be, like a little bit more, but putting a cap on that and making sure that people are not taking advantage of. So when we say like people are kind of like in sort of predatory circumstances, payday lenders, which Vermont has done a lot to kind of rein in and not allow, here in the state, is another example of this where, people want to try to get, usually in maybe like a lower income situation, get money early, but then end up paying like a lot more on the back end. So like those are kind of areas where we look to see, what can we do to kind of rein in that sort of behavior.
Got it. Okay. That feels very important. And I'm learning very quickly that there are a lot of predatory folks out there trying to take advantage.
Yeah. And, and some people are trying to take advantage and some of it's just kind of, I don't want to make it sound like, everybody who goes into that line of business is necessarily evil, but this is, sometimes how that works. And if we don't put guardrails in place, things can, get out of hand and people get taken advantage of. So, we're looking for where do we put those guardrails in place.
Okay, got it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I think in a similar vein, though I think it's a little bit different, I want to talk about net neutrality.
Yeah.
Because this is something I've been learning a lot about, seeing it in the news. I feel like I understand it as a concept, sort of in theory, but in practice, I'm a little blurry. So can you explain net neutrality to me like I'm 5 years old?
Sure. Well, I'll try. 5 years old. Maybe 10. I don't know.
Whatever feels right.
We'll see. We'll have to ask a kindergartner afterwards if this made sense. But
okay.
And I will try to keep this somewhat brief because we could actually spend 40 or 50 minutes on net neutrality, and maybe that'll be another episode at some point. But this will be like the 2 or 3 minute version, hopefully. But this is an idea that's really been around since kind of the beginning of the internet. And actually, the founder of the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee, has always been a big proponent of this. But the calls for it didn't grow until, really, I would say, kind of the maybe mid 2000s onward. And it's this concept that the internet service providers, so, these are different companies. In the case of, we get internet on our phones now, right? So in that case, the internet service provider is usually the phone company. It might be like Verizon or AT&T, whoever's providing you that service to be able to get that data and that information and go on the web. At your home, the person usually, or the company providing internet service, it could be like a cable company like Comcast, Xfinity. It could be, if you live in Burlington Telecom, maybe providing fiber. In Vermont now, we have a bunch of communications union districts that are, spinning up and providing people internet. But so whoever you get your internet from, the idea here is that company should not be able to discriminate in terms of how they are providing that content to you. So not blocking, throttling, or otherwise kind of limiting based on what that content is. So it's not so much like the idea of like censorship, although I guess there might be some like elements of that, but literally saying, okay, internet content coming from company X, we're going to allow to come through, at a faster rate than content coming from company B. And you might immediately be thinking, well, why would that be a problem?
I am thinking
What possible incentive might that internet service provider have to, slow down something? And it could be something ideological. Probably not that in a lot of cases, but that's obviously like a worry. We want to just treat all that stuff equally. But really, why? And I mentioned the mid 2000s as I think like when you start seeing people raising this as a concern and saying we need to have clear kind of net neutrality rules or laws, is what we've started to see is people call it vertical integration or companies buying other lines of businesses. So if you imagine company X as an internet service provider, but that same company then buys another company that creates content that goes over the internet, okay, they may now have a conflict of interest here where they may be incentivized to favor their content. And this isn't like a totally hypothetical example, but Comcast was an internet provider and a cable provider for a long, long time, and then they bought, and they're now spinning off some of this, but like NBC Universal and that whole universe. So I'm not saying that they're doing this, but they could have the incentive, like Peacock, the streaming service, to to their customers, allow that to go through, faster, clearer, better, and throttle streaming competitors like Netflix or something like that. So as people saw, again, and this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, whether it's near monopoly things or when we see consolidation, particularly in the space, it puts consumers at more of a disadvantage because at the end of the day, who's ultimately harmed by this?
Right.
The consumer not getting kind of fair and equal playing field, and also potentially, internet content creators, because the other worry is that they might, the internet service providers maybe charge or allow premium fees for, say Google has the money, they want to pay, a fee to have their, content or whatever, be faster, not be throttled. So this has been a real concern, and people say, no, we should just treat all the content equally, and treat that data equally, and that's what net neutrality is. So we advocate for that. I now hesitate. I will give the briefest of where that stands. So this obviously was something that, like I mentioned, started to pick up steam. And in the Bush era, George W. Bush, so we're now going back 20-something years, they put forward sort of voluntary guidelines around net neutrality. People said, obviously, that's not good enough. And then during the Obama era, net neutrality activists advocated for years and years. And finally, the FCC did issue essentially, and if we might be getting some real net neutrality people in the comments saying you're simplifying this. I am very much simplifying this. A lot of stuff happened in between. But suffice to say, the Obama administration and the FCC, they finally did implement strong net neutrality rules. And almost immediately, when Trump became president the first time, Trump's FCC repealed those net neutrality rules.
Perfect.
Yeah. And in that time period, a number of states, Vermont was one of them, enacted certain different state level net neutrality laws that kind of put things in place. Those are almost all immediately challenged by the internet service providers and that industry. And a lot of those remain in the courts to this day. And then when Biden became president, it took almost the entire presidency, but his FCC put net neutrality rules back in place. Those were immediately challenged, and just recently in January, appeals court struck them down, basically saying that the FCC didn't have clear authority to be able to do this. This has to do with something called the loss of now Chevron deference and the Loper-Bright case. Again, we could do another whole podcast on that. We won't. So where does that leave us? Well, we don't really have federal net neutrality protections. It's unlikely now to be able to come from the FCC. Congress would have to act and clearly do that. That is unlikely at this moment, given the way the Congress is. So it really does kind of come down to the states. And so there are things that states can do. Vermont, we previously did pass a law. Like I said, it's still kind of hanging in the courts, but that said the state of Vermont would only contract with internet service providers that certify as net neutral. So we do have that in place. There has been legislation introduced this session. It probably won't make the crossover deadline, but that would clearly establish net neutrality rules and require internet service providers in Vermont to certify as net neutral. So there are legislators that are kind of interested in this, and we're keeping an eye on that. But that may have maybe more than 3 minutes, but less than 40. So that's net neutrality.
Got it. Wow. Okay. I realized I actually knew even less about the topic than I thought.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful. Yeah. But sticking on this track of legislation, which you've brought up,
sure.
I want to continue with that, but pivot a little bit and talk about data privacy.
Okay.
So House Bill 121, Vermont's data privacy bill, passed last session in the House and Senate, but then was vetoed by the governor.
Yes.
So that's where the progress on that front halted.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that bill would sort of change the dynamic in Vermont, what it would accomplish, and if there's any possibility of continuing that progress this session or next session.
Great question. And it's timely as we're recording this because that is definitely coming up. So going back to that bill, it was H 121. That was the bill number last session. There's a different H 121 that's not related this session. But there is a similar bill this session that has a different number. It's actually S71 on the Senate side. And I forget the exact number on the House. So there's companion bills, but neither here nor there. The important part of the question that you asked is what would it do, right? H121 is what we would refer to as a comprehensive consumer data privacy bill. Right now, this will be a theme. In the United States, we lack a federal comprehensive data privacy law. Other jurisdictions, Europe has what's called GDPR. Have these sort of things. In the United States, we don't have a comprehensive federal data privacy law. We do have different sectoral things. People are familiar with sort of the alphabet soup, whether it's HIPAA, which governs health data, COPPA, which is children's online privacy protection, FERPA, which is the federal education. So there is an alphabet soup of sectoral privacy things that kind of cover different sectors. It's very confusing to navigate as a consumer, to understand, and you see this kind of thing with, for instance, something like HIPAA. People get confused all the time. So they think, HIPAA covers health data. So, therefore, nobody should ever be allowed to have or share any of my health information. That's not exactly accurate because it only applies to sort of HIPAA covered entities. So your doctor is not allowed to share out, health information. But if, an app is able to glean that you have maybe a heart condition or something from monitoring and doing that stuff, and that's not a health covered entity, there's nothing to stop the maker of that application or whatever from selling that data or packaging or that sort of thing. So this, you could see, it becomes very confusing for a consumer to navigate. And so the idea is we want something that's more comprehensive. We don't have it at the federal level. Going back to something I mentioned before, it seems unlikely that Congress is going to pass, a federal comprehensive data privacy law anytime soon. So that leaves it again to the states. Since 2018, I believe it's 2018, we can double check offline or somebody will correct me again in the comments. Several states, starting with California, have started passing different, and they're all in name, comprehensive data privacy laws. They vary wildly in terms of what exactly they protect, how strong they are, and sad to say, I would say the vast majority of these comprehensive data privacy laws are not very strong, not very protective of consumers. That is not true of H121, the bill that nearly got enacted last session in Vermont. Had that been enacted, it would have been one of, if not arguably, the strongest. And that's because it includes, and this is true of the bill S71 that I mentioned that's being considered this session, it includes what we would consider sort of 4 key strong principles or pieces in it. The first is this idea of data minimization, a strong data minimization standard. What is data minimization? This is
Tell me.
yeah, that was a rhetorical question, but yeah. What is data minimization? It's the idea that a company should not collect or process or use our personal data collect more of it or use it in a way that is not necessary to provide the good or services that one expects. So, when I'm using something like, or if I go onto Amazon or, and I want to buy something, they need to have, certain basic information from me, my name, presume my email to send me kind of a receipt. They need my address to be able to deliver it. Like, I need to provide that information to them to get, the good or service. But they may not need my exact geolocation for when I'm doing this. They may not need to track me across other parts of the internet. So really, we're trying to cut down on sort of these unnecessary uses, and that's data minimization. But the interesting thing about that concept is there are things called data minimization in a lot of these weak state data privacy laws. And it sounds similar, but it's different by a few words. And those few words are important. So what we hope to see in a data privacy law is it says exactly what I just said, that, company will not, collect or process, data beyond what is necessary to deliver the good or service, kind of end of sentence. Most of these data minimizations say a company shall not collect or process data beyond that which they disclose to the consumer, which kind of like sounds maybe okay on paper, like, oh, it's transparency. They're going to tell you what they're going to do with the data, and they won't do anything beyond that. The problem is we see what these disclosures look like. They're often very kind of long, arduous. People don't read them. So really, that kind of thing is almost worse than trying to require either opt-in consent from a consumer or opt out, because it actually incentivizes a company to bury kind of in a long sort of disclosure all of these different uses that they're going to do with somebody's data. They know nobody's going to read that, so it allows them to kind of basically do whatever they want and say, oh yeah, we're minimizing the data, we're disclosing it, it's out there and you can see. So we want to avoid that, and the bill that passed in H121 last year and S71 at the moment has what we consider a strong data minimization standard. The other thing that we really want to see is a ban on the sale of sensitive data. So sensitive data can be defined in a couple different ways. The way it's defined in the bill is, and this is not going to be comprehensive, I don't have it in front of me, but data relating to things like race, gender, sexual orientation, biometric data, so characteristics that we can't change, your thumbprint, your eye scan, these sorts of things, your exact geolocation data, which, again, a lot of applications on the phone have potentially access to, and all that sort of stuff. This is sort of the most sensitive kind of data, and even with data minimization in place, certain companies, applications may need to access sensitive data to provide that good or service. If you want to be able to use like GPS on your phone, it needs to be able to access your geolocation data. So we want to, though, even if they are accessing that, make sure that we're banning the sale of that kind of data, so that okay. You can collect it, especially if you need it for that, but you're not selling it to people. The third thing, and this is kind of, I think, really important, and I'd say one of the big ways that S71 is a little bit different than H121 is that it really clarifies that we are trying to incentivize privacy protective, but effective first-party advertising. Like, there's sometimes people saying, "Oh, you're trying to kill advertising." No, there are ways to do privacy protective advertising that does not rely on tracking people, all across the internet and all of their behavior. And this bill will do that. Allowing people, to if somebody buys a blue jacket from your store, you can still turn around and say, "Hey, do you maybe want to buy these blue mittens?" Like, we're not trying to stop that kind of first party advertising, but it's this kind of persistent tracking across the internet that is really what's problematic. And then the fourth part is the idea of enforcement. So how do you enforce these laws? Because this is where it kind of gets a little bit interesting, because the internet is vast. Every website you go to, every application that you're using, it's all kind of collecting data
it's a big
constantly. And so and the person who's, chiefly enforcing this is the state attorney general's office, which I should just mention, in general, state attorney generals are kind of like the front line of consumer protection. States have broad consumer protection rights, and it's on the attorney general to kind of really, enforce that. And we have actually a great attorney general in this state, particularly when it comes to consumer protection, Charity Clark, also a big proponent of data privacy bill. And but as I mentioned, it's very, very vast to kind of try and enforce that, almost like a little bit of a whack-a-mole. So what we have advocated for, and privacy and consumer advocates have advocated for, and not a single one of these comprehensive state data privacy bills has included, is a private right of action, which allows individual consumers to hold those who violate their privacy rights accountable in court, allows them to sue somebody who's violated their privacy rights. So this private right of action, it's, at least from the industry, they consider it very controversial. You can imagine they don't want to be sued if they violate privacy rights. We think it's important because A, it gives people rights to hold those who violate their privacy accountable. It's also important as an enforcement mechanism because if this possibility is out there, it makes people more likely to follow the law and actually comply and actually protect people's privacy. So that's really important. But like I said, this is something that gets fought pretty hard. So the version of the private right of action that's actually in S71 is fairly narrow, and it's try to listen to these concerns, and it really would only apply to data brokers, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about them, and large data collectors, ones that hold thousands and thousands of records and have large revenue, and only if they violate the sensitive data portion of the law. So this is I would say a step in the right direction. But it, and it's also a reasonable balance. It's tailored. It allows for this enforcement, but because this law would apply to a lot of people, a lot of companies, websites collect data. It allows folks to kind of comply with the other parts, but make sure that the most sensitive stuff is being protected, and it affords people that right to kind of hold people accountable. So that's what we consider part of a strong data privacy law. That's what we're advocating for. I mentioned S71. The Senate, right before they broke for town meeting week, Senate institutions got a walkthrough of that bill. And as we understand it, they're going to continue taking testimony next week. So I'm not sure when this is going to air. It might be dropping right in the middle of when that testimony is happening. So anybody listening, if this is something you're interested in, we'll probably have some stuff up on the VPIRG website. You can kind of check out, get some information. And, I would encourage you to just get in contact with your senators and let them know this is something that's important to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. Appreciate the call to action there. And just personally, I'm curious, do you think that S71 does have the ability to see passage? Are you feeling hopeful about that?
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to knock over the entire set here.
Excited.
I'm so excited. And these chairs, they have the wheels, which is good, but I'm the type of person who moves a lot. I'm sure, for the video folks.
Jersey.
Yeah, Eli's probably you keep drifting out of frame, I'm sure, on something. But anyway, it's all good. Does it? I think, yes, there's a pathway. I mean, I think, again, people getting in contact and saying, this is important. I don't want to downplay kind of the sort of intense lobbying, particularly from the big tech, the big data industry, the impact that has. Obviously, we didn't succeed last year. I mean, we got it passed through the House and the Senate and got to the governor's desk. He vetoed it. The House did actually override that with pretty overwhelming numbers, but it came up short in the Senate. And so, I think we got to get, people speaking up, telling, their legislators this is something that they care about. And also, I think important is outreach, because I think what we saw last session, particularly with H121, is there were, Vermont, local businesses who maybe were a little bit unsure, how is this going to affect me? And a lot of them, I think, want to be, privacy protective. Here's the thing. The vast majority of businesses, particularly small businesses in Vermont, they want to basically minimize their data. They're not trying to monetize people's data. They just want to get the information they need to get to provide the goods and services. So, but they want to and be able to do some of that first party advertising that we talked about and that sort of thing. So I think, outreach and having people really kind of understand what is and isn't in this bill, and understand that, yeah, you are going to be able to comply with this. And it's good. It's good not just for consumers, but I would argue for businesses too, because a big problem that we now are starting to see is just sort of distrust of the marketplace and people kind of being distrustful about using certain applications or using certain things because they just don't know what they're giving up. And if we can kind of reestablish some of that trust, and a big kind of underlying philosophy of this particular data privacy bill and what consumer and data privacy advocates are advocating for is this idea of data privacy by default. Like a lot of what we've now kind of run into, particularly in this country, is a really kind of confusing mess of opt-ins, opt-outs. You probably encounter pop-ups of what cookies do you want to ignore or not ignore, and we want to move away from a lot of having the consumer have to make decisions and understand all this, and just if you have this idea of data minimization in place, it's privacy by default. You're not having to make all these decisions. You kind of just know and trust that when you're interacting that your information is being protected and they're not gathering more than you expect and they're not using it in ways that you don't expect. So that is, I guess, a little bit off target of can we pass this? I think yes, but it's not going to be easy because the tech and data industry is very much built on kind of unfettered access, unfortunately, to data, and they have a lot to lose if we kind of change and move to that privacy by default sort of setup. But I think it's worth trying to do.
I do too, and my fingers are crossed.
Yeah.
Also, I don't care who else is in the room. I think you're an expert. I consider you an expert on all of these topics. But I so appreciate being in Vermont because I'm getting the gist and I'm feeling like there's deep care and concern going into this work. So that makes me feel confident. I will say I obviously feel less confident about what's happening federally, as you've touched on, which makes me afraid of the answer you're going to give me for this next question.
Sure.
But I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
So let's just say there's a legal mechanism in place, right? I don't know, the Privacy Act of 1974.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then let's say we have this individual who just happens to be ignoring that legal mechanism.
Just totally hypothetically.
Hypothetically, maybe it's Elon Musk.
Yes.
And so now we have this very unqualified individual who has access to the personal data of millions of Americans.
Yeah.
In that situation, what can be done?
Well, you were nervous for this answer, rightfully so. I mean, the short answer, for us as individuals, is maybe not a whole lot. But that doesn't mean nothing. That doesn't mean nothing is being done. As I understand, I believe, last I checked, and this might be updated, 11 lawsuits have already been filed to try and kind of stop what's going on there. That's going to take a little while to kind of, sort itself out. But, they've been able to at least prevent, some of the worst things happening there. The other thing that, that we can do as individuals, and granted, in Vermont, this is actually good news. Our federal delegation is thankfully, speaking out very vocally about not just this, but, the other kind of, I'll just broadly describe it as nonsense, going on, in Washington, D.C. But that doesn't mean that, they probably don't appreciate hearing from Vermonters, letting them know that you're concerned about this, standing up. And then the other thing is, just on a basic level, and this isn't just because of, what's going on with, as you alluded to, having access to personal data, federal records in violation of the Privacy Act, or arguably in violation of the Privacy Act. But there are things that we can kind of be doing just as consumers to, kind of protect our information, protect against identity theft. Things like freezing your credit report, which, people can do. You can do that, and then that prevents anybody who kind of has your information or data, or if it falls in the wrong hands, if there's a breach, from trying to, get a loan in your name or trying to, use your identity in a wrong way. So freezing your credit. And then if you need to actually avail yourself of that, if you need to go get, a loan for a car or whatever, you can install the credit report. It's a little bit more of a manual process, but it is a way to, protect yourself. Similarly, Americans can get a free credit report from every of the three main credit agencies every single year. So this is a way that you can check in to see if anything's been kind of going on that's odd. That's something I would recommend. I'm almost positive I have this right, but if not, we'll have to edit it in post, Eli. But it's annualcreditreport.com. That is the official government sponsored website where you can go request a credit report. And like I said, you get one free one from each of the three main ones. So if you space it out, you could actually get 3 credit reports, per year, and stay on top of that. So that's the thing that we recommend people do. So there are things all the way from letting the kind of courts work through their process. And that's been, one of the most robust things, I guess, for lack of a better term, resisting is that, the kind of the court process in these lawsuits to, making your thoughts known with the federal delegation to doing, personal things that it's good hygiene anyway to kind of keep your information secure and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot. I could be doing a better job of that, I think, but thank you for that. That's helpful. And I like the way you referred to a lot of this as nonsense because I feel similarly about it. And I do have another sort of nonsense question for you that I think is relevant. It's something I read in the news the other day. Apparently, the UK government has asked Apple for backdoor access to their user data. And so it's my understanding that this is not something that Apple has done before. And while they did not necessarily comply with this request, they did, however, disable their advanced data protection feature, which would allow for end-to-end encryption of messages and photos. And so that's a lot of words that I'm saying. So just to clarify, what I mean by end-to-end encryption is that only the sender and intended recipient can access that content, right? So this is enabled to protect folks from hackers and otherwise bad actors. Yep. Is that the...
Yeah.
You would agree with
the
way to
you're the
explain
expert now.
Okay.
That's great
Perfect.
expertise.
I'm also an expert.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions for this. The first is, will this change in the UK affect US users here?
I don't think it will immediately because my understanding is that Apple is only rolling back the access to that feature, the advanced data protection in the UK. Whether, similar requests of Apple happen here and whether they relent, that maybe is, I guess, remains to be seen. And I will say, Apple, to their credit, largely has been one of the better, I would say, tech companies in terms of providing these more privacy protective and security protective features. They rolled out advanced data protection. I want to say it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I forget which version of iOS that rolled out on. I don't know if there's necessarily an immediate threat, but it's a troubling sort of thing to see, these companies kind of respond this way. And I mean, at least they did reject the backdoor access request, but still rolling back that protection for people in the UK is unfortunate.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. And so my follow-up question to this, I feel like I sound certainly uneducated in asking it, but do our phones, your phone, my phone, do they currently have this advanced data protection feature? Possibly.
It has to be an iPhone, obviously. Okay. This is something that Apple offers. And it's only on things on, it might be iOS, I forget the exact number, 16 and newer, which most if you have a fairly recent iPhone and have it updated, you probably do have this available. I don't believe it's on by default. I think you have to go into your settings and turn it on if that's something that you want. Okay. And what it does is, as you mentioned, it's the end-to-end encryption, and it backs up basically like anything that you have like as part of iCloud. So this includes like things like photos, but also like backups of your phone, which include backups of, if you use iMessage as like your messaging, includes, backup of those messages, which is kind of important because that was kind of I don't know if we'll call it like a loophole, but a way that, your messages could be, potentially seen by hackers because those backups weren't previously end-to-end encrypted. But if you turn on advanced data protection, it is. there are additional steps there. Like when you turn it on, I think you either need to set up like either a friend or a family member as like having secondary access, or there are ways to make sure that you have a code to have access. Because the whole point of this is by turning it on, even Apple themselves do not have access to those backups. Like they're totally encrypted.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that I definitely have not set that up.
Probably not.
And
if you don't remember doing this, you probably have not set it up.
No, I am not protected in any way. So
not on this. I mean, there are certain things that are that are by default, and this kind of goes back to here's the thing about whether it's consumer protection in general, but more specifically in the space of like data privacy and stuff like that. Again, trying to have as much of this be by default as possible, because this is where I think a lot of people kind of rightfully throw up their hands and kind of maybe take the attitude of, well, my information is just going to all be out there. It is what it is, because it becomes very difficult to navigate, what privacy settings do I have to have on? What do I have to have off? How is it going to impact my ability to maybe use a particular app? Sometimes an application or a website might make it seem like you have to provide all this information. Otherwise, it's not going to work for you. And you feel obligated to trade that privacy and that protection, be able to use a service. If we move more toward this idea of just it is privacy by default, take that onus off of the consumer and put the onus on the individual company that is collecting and using this data to use it minimally and responsibly, that just works so much better for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I feel very overwhelmed by all of this, so I love the idea of having it be on the company to figure it out. I'm sure others would agree with me. Yeah, I guess more of that is what I'm hoping for. And it does feel to me like we are just like totally at the whim of a handful of big tech companies, right? And so I'm wondering if, maybe you don't want to answer this, I don't know. But I'm wondering if there are certain companies that feel more dangerous than others. Like, is there a world where I should be deactivating certain accounts and moving my data, or it's just like way too late for me?
I would never say it's way too late. And maybe rather than answer it the way of like more dangerous, because I don't necessarily want to classify any specific company as being particularly dangerous. Various companies have various levels of commitment to privacy and security, and some of their business models are more reliant on using and in some cases selling people's data. So I maybe answer it a different way and say, like, you also have the ability to seek out and use companies or use tools or services that are more protective. So just for instance, in terms of like search engines, DuckDuckGo is a search engine that is, known to be more privacy protective. So like
never heard of it.
Yeah, DuckDuckGo. So like, so that's an option. So, again, it does require a little bit of research on the part of the individual. And I don't want to make it seem like, like we as individuals have no responsibility, but again, wanting to not make it so that you have to be a complete sort of privacy expert and understand all the technology out there to be able to just kind of like use the internet and use these tools and services. So yeah, I mean, I think that you can seek certain things out and try as much as possible. A lot of people write on this, so like go into a search engine, go into DuckDuckGo and just like ask question, like, what are the privacy policies or settings on, and do your research maybe before you download or use a particular app and understand, what you're potentially giving up. I mean, it's a little trite. It's a little bit of an old saying or maybe a cliche, but I think it is still accurate, and people, should tend to hang on to this. The idea that if you're not paying for a service or you're not paying for something, the product is probably you or your data. So a lot of times, if you're working on, using an app or something and it's like, it's totally free. The reason it's probably free is because it is taking a lot of information about you and either then using that information to then sell advertising space or something to other advertisers, or they're just selling that information to somebody else. So, I don't mean that to like, have people be paranoid or stop using stuff, but it's more just like, ask yourself that question, like, why is this service being provided to me and what am I potentially giving up?
Okay. Yeah, that is helpful, and I feel like a very politically correct way to answer my question. So thank you. I feel like your call out to DuckDuckGo is insinuating that maybe you don't use Google search, but I won't make you answer that. Okay.
Well, actually, and just one point on that is just also like, again, when we talk about monopoly or near monopoly things, like sometimes it's just how unavoidable some of this stuff is. So even if you want to use, DuckDuckGo, Google is the default search in the majority of web browsers. Like, so just again, if you're just trying to live your life normally and you just want to get a quick answer to a question, I don't want to make it sound like I've never used Google. I absolutely, it is somewhat unavoidable. So, sometimes at the end of the day, it is okay if you're giving up, some level of information, but it's more important that you understand what you're giving up.
Right. And you have the consent to do so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. So I want to talk about data brokers. I know you touched on this really briefly at the beginning, but we didn't get too deep into that. So to clarify, data brokers are third-party companies that we don't have any interaction with, right? But they have vast troves of our own data. How is that possible?
Yeah. This is an area where Vermont was actually at sort of the forefront of like trying to regulate. We passed, I believe it was the first state data broker registry law in the nation in 2018. And the idea of like, why do we need a registry of data brokers? Why do we need to kind of have a list of these companies is exactly the reason that you just, kind of brought to light is these are companies that have a lot of information, in some cases, a lot of information about us and that we have never directly interacted with, right? So going back to just previous example, if I go and conduct a Google search, it is not unreasonable to think that Google, I interacted with them, that at least Google knows that I conducted that search. Or if I go and buy something from Amazon or, any kind of seller, you're interacting with that. Like, that you've provided them your information or so on and so forth. But there exists kind of in the data ecosystem, these companies, data brokers, who their kind of sole reason for being is to collect information on consumers from a variety of sources. Some of it is publicly available. Some of it might be, like I said, if somebody's developed an app and that app is free, but it's tracking other information about you. Maybe it's like tracking your running habits, the locations that you go to or whatever. That app may then be selling that information about you as a consumer to somebody else. And often the person or entity that they're selling it to are these data brokers. So data brokers are, again, like I said, collecting maybe publicly available information, other information, and amassing, profiles on us. And then their line of business then is to either sell that information to somebody else who might want, a marketing list to go reach out to people, or, providing it to people to do market research or all kinds of other things. So you have, these companies that have arguably, in some cases, more information about us because they collected from many different sources than the companies that we directly interact with, that we know that they have some level of information. And if those, companies are, those data brokers, if they fall into like have a data breach or something like that, they could be losing or, making available sensitive consumer information. And the consumer may not realize that they're at risk. A few years ago, Marriott hotels had a data breach. And if I know that I had stayed at a Marriott hotel and I see that on the news, and there also are data breach notification laws, like certain companies are supposed to notify you if your information's been compromised, you get that information. But regardless, if I see on the news that Marriott hotels had a data breach and I know I'd stayed at one, I might then, take steps to protect myself, in terms of either freezing your credit report or just like understanding that. But if one of these data brokers who I've never heard of and don't know the name of that or whatever, and I hear that, data broker company B, has had a data breach, my information, could be out there, and I might not be or might not, pay any mind to that. So that's why they're kind of an interesting is, I guess, a somewhat neutral word to use for it. But, a part of the data ecosystem and why Vermont said, well, at a minimum, we want to establish this registry where if you're a data broker, if you meet this definition, come forward, register with the state, tell us who you are, tell us a little bit about your business practices, what kind of information you're collecting. Are you collecting information on minors? And what are your opt-out procedures? Like if people want to remove themselves, do you offer that? And how can people do that? So that's really a first step. I mean, we want to get to the point where people can kind of universally opt out from these data brokers. But at a minimum, Vermont started having these companies register with the state. So we have a registry and we know who is doing this sort of business.
Got it. Okay. That's a lot to process and to unpack, and I feel unsettled by this. To be honest.
There's a little bit of a saying, like, if you're looking to feel less paranoid, don't talk to a privacy advocate. Like,
don't learn.
Yeah, don't learn. Yeah. But I also don't want people to kind of take that attitude, because like there is like a balance there. Like, ignorance is bliss. You can take that approach, but it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, the more you're a little bit unsettled, I mean, then people maybe get involved and start calling for changes. Like, we don't have to operate in this way. We can, again, move toward a privacy by default model. We can give people common sense protections. And it doesn't have to be all shadowy and conspiratorial. Like, that's not what I want. That's not the world I want to live in.
Yeah, me neither. That's good to know. I'm going to call my legislator after this. But I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad we're digging in a little bit more into data brokers, because it got me thinking and it got me interested. And I did take a look at the data brokers that are registered in the state of Vermont, which I found out there were over 1,000.
Yeah.
That surprised me.
Yeah.
It's such a small state. There are so many people trying to take our data from us. But of course, that got me thinking, and I was seeing all of these sort of, frankly, silly names and very obscure names of these data brokers, which really surprised me. And of course, I wanted to turn it into a game. Okay. So how about we play a game of data broker or bust?
Okay.
And I'm going to list 2 names to you at a time.
Okay.
One is real.
Okay.
You need to tell me which one is real.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So, Zach, let's play data broker or bust.
Okay.
All right. So you'll tell me which one is real.
Which one I think is real.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I regret to inform you there is no prize.
That's fine. It's just for the fun.
And for bragging rights.
Yeah.
You do a good job. No pressure. Okay. So number 1, we've got Gravy Analytics and Mashed Up Inc.
Oh, wow. So I see what you did there. Mashed Up sounds a little more real. Gravy, I'm going to say sounds like something that you came up with. So I'm going to go with Mashed Up.
Well, Mashed Up is the one I came up with.
Oh, man. This is hard. This is really hard.
All right. So I did a good job.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2. Maybe you'll come back around.
All right.
We've got horsewagon.com and Project Apple Cart.
Okay. This is really hard. I think Project Apple Cart. That sounds like a tech startup-y sort of thing. I'm going to go Project Apple Cart.
That's the real one.
All right.
So
there we go.
You're back on the board.
All right.
Okay. Number 3, Mountain Trek AI or Let It Ride Sports.
Okay. You know what? I like Let It Ride Sports. I just like the sound of that. Let's say that that's the real one.
That is the real one.
All
I
right.
couldn't tell you why.
Okay,
but, that is real. Okay. Next, we've got Forewarn in all caps or Truth Finder in all caps.
Wow, Truth Finder. That sounds like a little that's intense, but yeah, I like that. I'm gonna go with Truth Finder.
Okay, they're both real.
Oh,
so you would have gotten it either way.
Trick question.
All right, next and final question. This one's my favorite. Consolidated Information Services Solutions, LLC, DBA Universal CIS.
Okay.
Or Information Technology Database, LLC, DBA Risk Collateral Deluxe.
I'm not going to attempt to repeat all that because I feel like that, I'm going to just go with the latter, Risk Collateral Deluxe.
As the real one.
As the real one.
That is false.
Okay. You did very good coming up with these.
It was hard. It took me a bit of time,
Yes.
but I'm glad it was tricky because I was scared it would be just like a walk in the park for you.
Well, I think sort of though the point, and clearly I've not memorized the 1,000 different lists.
Why not, Zach?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think they're all at varying levels of if you look, some are active, some are inactive. But I think, there's at least 1,000 named data brokers in that registry. But I think this illustrates sort of an important point is every single one of those things that you've named, like I've never heard of those companies.
Right.
Right. And I'm not saying that all of them all have all of our information. Like I don't know about all their individual lines of business, but some of them very well could, because this is the business that they're in. Data brokers have information, and in some cases, vast amounts of information about us. And these are not entities that I've ever interacted with, that I even know the names of. And that's, it's a little troubling, to be honest.
Yeah, we just had this fun little moment, and now I'm back to being scared again.
Yeah, sorry.
So thank you for that, Zach. But it's a good segue, because adding to my very growing list of concerns, I am truly afraid of a future that is dominated by artificial intelligence. And I have felt this way ever since I saw the movie I, Robot, which came out in 2004.
Yeah.
You've seen it probably, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's been a while, but yeah, I think I saw it around when it first came out. Yeah.
Terrified me. Yeah. I don't recommend it, not because it's not a good movie. It is. It has Will Smith, but it really freaked me out in a big way. So I'm wondering if this fear I have is legitimate, or if I'm being a little bit irrational.
Can I say both? There's definitely legitimacy to that and concern. I mean, with any sort of new thing, but AI, it is a tool. It is a technology. Like, it is not inherently good or bad. I think it has. This is now me, just kind of like my personal opinion. I think it has a lot of potentially beneficial uses in terms of the ability to maybe automate certain tasks and make things easier, make it easier to find certain information. Also comes with a lot of risk. And also, when we talk about AI, I think depending on who you talk to, it conjures up a lot of different things in people's minds. And a lot of different things, I guess, can be described as AI, whether we're talking about things like ChatGPT and like these sort of things, or like generative AI. But it also could be, kind of like algorithmic decision making and or eventually like things like robotics and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of different things, and they all come with kind of positives and negatives. And I think why it's really important for policymakers to get out in front of this as much as possible. And we used the term guardrails earlier on, like trying to establish this because this technology is deploying rapidly, and it's advancing rapidly, and almost faster than people can kind of get a hold on. So I think your concern is well founded, but again, I think there's reason. I mean, there are things that we can do to kind of try to foster the ethical, responsible, and sort of transparent use of AI, so that we're harnessing the good and protecting consumers, protecting individuals from the bad.
Okay. I like that. And I like the way you referenced ethical AI, because that leads into my next question about ethical AI.
Yeah.
So talking about generating AI searches, so specifically like ChatGPT, like you mentioned, my understanding is that to just pull up a very quick, simple search requires a tremendous amount of resources. So water, energy, what have you. I'm wondering if you could speak to the extraction of those resources and what it might mean for our environment.
Probably not good is my is the short answer there. Yeah. And this is a question with a lot of this technology. AI, this is not AI, but I mean, this has even come up with like blockchain and like cryptocurrency, things that require massive amounts of data storage. So VPIRG, we're the state's largest consumer protection and environmental organization, and this is an area where things cross over. And I know, again, this is something that certain jurisdictions, even states, are kind of starting to take a look at this and say, what is the impact? So again, this is like I said, the ethical use. It's a technology, but I think we can't put our head in the sand about what the impact and the resources that this sort of thing requires.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like more work to be done.
Yes.
More to explore.
Yes. And,
a gray area, like so much of what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So I feel like you've done a really great job of peppering ways that Vermonters can protect themselves, but I want to drive it home as we're bringing this conversation to a close. So I'll ask it again.
Yeah.
How can Vermonters better protect themselves and their data, whether that's digital or otherwise?
Yeah. Well, review a couple things that that we've mentioned already, which is things like credit freezes, getting free credit reports. It's a good way to just understand are there identity theft attempts going out there. I think paying attention to both like the news, like again, like when data breaches are reported, things like that. The Attorney General's office we have a great Attorney General, particularly when it comes to consumer protection. They put out scam reports and scam alerts. These are, things that people should just be aware of. And, I like to think that in general, like we're getting better at, recognizing this. I mean, we should maybe raise our hand. There's 4 people in this room. I wonder how many of us within the past month or so have maybe gotten a text message that is either, maybe like Easy Pass is trying to collect a toll. Yeah. Or, maybe like a USPS, a package like couldn't be delivered. These scams are pretty common. And again, I think, if you look at the Attorney General's website, they put out these alerts or whatever. But they're all the more common. You need to be, protective of yourself and kind of be up and understand that. The concern and the worry is, again, I'm going to worry you again, going back to, a couple of things that we talked about today is that the mass proliferation of our data coupled with technologies like AI can make these sorts of scams increasingly sophisticated. Think of something like what is commonly kind of called, like I believe the grandparent scam or something like that, where somebody usually an older person will get a call from either somebody pretending to be or on behalf of a grandchild, a grandniece, or somebody related who's in trouble somewhere. They're on spring break in the Bahamas or something like that, or whatever it might be. They need to have money wired or something like that. That's like a basic way that the scam can work. Or that might happen over email or some other thing. Well, if you think about it, the more information a scammer potentially has, maybe like because of like a data breach or something like that, and if they understand not just you as the potential victim, your name and your information and maybe your family member's name and information, but if they know where that family member has actually been traveling, if they know more about like your actual relationship, they can color that scam and make it more convincing. You add in something potentially, and this, I'm not saying that this is necessarily happening, I don't know, but like we talk about things like deep fakes or using AI to, actually, somehow take that person's voice and actually now sound like the person. Now it becomes very, very convincing and very, very difficult. So that's like another just great reason to try and kind of get these protections into place. And it goes back to something I was talking at the very beginning. If we can have less of that information out there, it makes, scams which, present potential financial, maybe, and sometimes, physical, risk or threat to people, it makes them harder to pull off and easier to recognize. So that's just like another kind of benefit to this. So being aware, to go back to your question, like how do you protect yourself? Like being aware, being up on these things, having a healthy level of skepticism. I don't want to say, paranoia, but just, having that. And then, again, doing some research and seeking out like ways that you could protect yourself. So we mentioned like, using DuckDuckGo for searches. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, they offer an add-on to your browser called Privacy Badger. Like I use that. It does, it blocks trackers and like certain ad blocking and things like that. There are a lot of these great tools that, like nonprofits, are putting out there, and often, for free. Consumer Reports has an app for your phone that's called Permission Slip that helps with protecting some of this stuff on your phone and then through apps. So like there are a lot of great things that people can do. But again, and people should avail themselves of these, but also just speaking up and saying that you want these protections, because also like ideally people aren't having to track down all kinds of tools and software and bells and whistles and all kinds of stuff just to protect themselves. Like that, again, should be the default. If I'll look directly into one of these cameras, like I probably said this 800 times, but maybe we'll get a clip up there. Privacy by default. That's what we want. Privacy by default. So maybe that's like a little made for TV moment, but
I love it. And don't click the Easy Pass link.
Yeah, don't click the link. It's often like a phishing scam. There's often a lot of steps to this. Like you can maybe sometimes get further down and still not like, be in total trouble. But just, if something seems weird,
it's weird.
Trust your instincts. That's the other thing. Privacy by default and trust your instincts.
I like it. Okay. So we talked a little bit about, and this is my last question. We talked a little bit about reaching out to legislators, how that can be useful.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that Vermonters can do to aid in the fight for comprehensive consumer protection and data privacy practices?
Yes, absolutely. Reach out to legislators, like we just said. If this is something that's interesting, if you're listening to this episode, if you're watching on YouTube, doing all the good stuff, you can reach out to me and I can let you know. Write a letter to your editor, get involved, because here's the thing. I think, at a certain level, policymakers, there are certain, lawmakers, policymakers who are great privacy champs, great consumer protection champs. But by and large, I think, and this is probably shared also by a lot of Vermonters, people want privacy. I don't think there's anybody who's no, I want everybody to have as much of my information as possible. But it feels a little bit big to kind of get your arms around. And it feels a little bit information's already all out there. The cat's out of the bag or genie's out of the bottle, whatever the metaphor is there. And also while I would like it, I feel I don't really totally understand this. And among the different issues, it'd be nice to have, but it's what are we really going to do? But there are things that we can do, and I think just getting out in there and saying this is something that's important to me. And like I said, it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, in a lot of ways, what we're advocating for is to make things simpler for consumers, to make things less complicated, and just have their privacy rights respected. So, you don't have to be, we started off talking about expertise. You don't have to be an expert to care about this. And if you're out there speaking up about it and making it known that this is a priority, I think policymakers will listen and they'll prioritize this more.
I love it. That's great. We've covered so much. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to share with our listeners, or have we've totally covered it all?
I feel like we've probably exhausted. I might be your longest guest, so that's not necessarily an honor that I want to have.
Well, I've had a great time.
I'm glad. But, I'm cognizant. I don't want to be the Adrian Brody of the podcast who set the record for longest acceptance speech at the Oscars.
How long is it? Do you know?
I think it was 5 minutes, 40 seconds or something like that. Oh. He told the orchestra, we don't have an orchestra to play me off here.
You could add one in, maybe.
Yeah, maybe add one in. Stop it. I have more information. No, I don't have more information. Unfortunately, I guess I am the Adrian Brody of the podcast, but hopefully this was a lot of good and informative stuff.
Yeah.
It
was so illuminating.
Hopefully people take something out of it.
I think so. Okay. I definitely did. I imagine our listeners will. I will say I'm deeply unsettled, but also equally motivated. I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm going to do something with all of this information. So thank you for being here, Zach. And I will let you get back to protecting Vermonters from some really deep, scary stuff.
All right.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's our episode. Thank you to Elijah and Zach for breaking down such a complicated and somewhat unsettling topic. At least for me, it was super helpful. As always, if you want to learn more about anything we discussed in today's episode, you can do so by checking out VPIRG.org, getting on our mailing lists, and following us on social media. Of course, do not forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars if you haven't already. And if you have some ideas for future episodes of this podcast, please reach out to me at jheiden@vpirg.org. That's JHEIDEN@VPIRG.org. As always, I want to give a special shout out to our co-producers, Katie and Elijah. And again, I'm Jordan Heiden, and you've been listening to Vermont's Voice. Take care and talk soon.